Today is 2/3/15. Happy Groundhog Day. And this is biology, so we're talking about what biomes are to start off with. Well, since you can all read, it's a large area of land that has a similar climate. A biome is not an ecosystem, and an ecosystem is not a biome. A biome is a description of a type of ecosystem, okay? So it's a bigger idea than that. And biomes occur in different places on the globe. So deserts, for instance, are one of the 7 major biome types we're going to talk about. There are deserts in lots of different places on the planet, and they're all different. You know, deserts are not identical, but they're similar. There are deciduous forests in different places on the planet. Now, our deciduous forest that we come from, our home biome, happens to be like really pretty super special. The eastern mixed mesophytic forest is amazing, and it's kind of unique in the world in terms of how diverse it is. But there are deciduous forests in Europe. If I put a blindfold on you and I dropped you in the middle of a forest in Germany or France or England or, well, getting up into Norway, it's a whole different thing. And I took the blindfold off and I said, "Where are you?" You'd say, "In the woods." It wouldn't look all that different from the woods here at home, you know. If you paid attention and if you really knew your trees and stuff, you'd start to figure out you weren't in Kansas anymore, well, or you weren't in Ohio anymore, but it would look similar. You know, you'd see similar species of plants and animals, and it would look familiar, but a little different. So these are 7 major biomes. These are not all the biomes that exist. Okay, these are the big ones, and these are the ones that are most commonly talked about. The tundra, the taiga, it's pronounced Tyga, like that Tyga's gonna get ya. Tyga. Okay, I have a lot of fun with that. You can have fun with it later on your own time. The temperate deciduous forest, well, that's us. That's us. And we're going to talk about what each of those words mean. The temperate grassland. Hey, guess what grows in a grassland? Grass. Yeah, I know. You'd never have figured that out. The desert, which you probably all kind of know from, you know, movies or just images that you've seen. We think about deserts a lot. The savanna and then the tropical rainforest, which we do to death, I think, in schools. How many of you did a rainforest project somewhere along the line? Yeah, we don't live in a rainforest. Quit talking about it. Why is it so special? But anyway, so those are the 7 major ones, and we're going to talk about each of them briefly to describe what they are. What makes something one of these things? Well, there are 2 factors, temperature and precipitation. And I'll let you copy that. So our next 2 categories up, if we get a little bit more precipitation than a desert, we move into the region of savannas, which are a type of grassland, and then temperate grasslands. And we'll look at some pictures of those and look at their characteristics.
Is the mixture basically a desert and a grassland?
No.
There's only shrubs and some types of trees.
But it's not a mixture of anything. It's just its own thing. So it's not like mixing pigments or paints. I see what you're saying. It's got more precipitation than a desert, and it tends to be warmer than a temperate grassland. So temperate refers to the temperature.
So it's in the middle.
Not really. Again, it's its own thing. We're going to look at more pictures. Okay, so if you've got a little bit more moisture than a desert, you're probably looking at some kind of grassland. There's one weird category here that sounds like clickbait. This one weird category. Well, we have sticking out here tundra. I have never been to the tundra. One of my goals in life is to go see the tundra sometime. Never been there. And tundras, oops, I have the, oh goodness, I have the temperature arrow backwards. Cut. Decreasing temperature, sorry. Okay, so tundras are very, dry, and they're also very cold. That's the dominant feature of a tundra, is that they are down here in the both cold and dry. Make sure you reverse your temp arrow since I screwed that up. So if we get a little bit more moisture than in a savanna, but it's still warm, we end up with a tropical seasonal forest. So this is a forest that changes over the course of the year like ours does. Our forest looks different all 4 seasons of the year. So does a tropical seasonal forest. The temperate forest is what we have. That's what we live in here. We have seasons that look different and feel different. The temperature varies widely. And then we have the Tyga. It's got less moisture and a lower temperature than where we are here. And there are areas of Tyga that exist in North America, sometimes called the Great Northern Forest. Parts of Maine are Tyga, if you ever get a chance to go. That's another place I'd love to see is some of the state forests and national forests in Maine. They're beautiful and vast and very, very, very undeveloped and very wild and really cool. But so the Tyga is, again, it's colder, it's drier. So the higher we go this way, the warmer it is, but the further this way we go, the colder it is. Okay, let's get our last. Okay, so tropical rainforest is the warmest and the wettest. I know somebody who did Peace Corps work in Africa, living in a tropical rainforest, who said, every single day I got up and I put on the lightest, thinnest, most quick-drying running shorts I had. I lived in running shorts, a sports bra, and water sandals, because anything that you put on your body was immediately soaked, and it would remain soaked all day. Nothing ever dried out. And it was hot and like muggy in a way that we can't even imagine, with lots of bugs. Doesn't that sound like an advertisement? Not so much. So tropical rainforest, very hot, lots of moisture. Temperate rainforest is kind of a special beast. It's not one of the 7 that we talk about, but if you've ever seen pictures of places like Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, those exist along the coast there in Northern California and up into especially Washington State. You have temperate rainforests. They're not hot, but they are rainforests. It rains every single day. Sometimes, 5 minutes of rain and then nothing, and then 5 minutes of rain and then 15 minutes of dry. It's damp, to say the least. Lots of moisture, but cooler. Okay, let's look at some pictures of each of these and talk about what they are. So we'll talk about the tundra first. This is, most of Alaska is tundra so far. It is cold and it is dry. The dominant feature of the tundra is permafrost. That means ground that is permanently frozen. Their permafrost is like bedrock. Here, if you're building a bridge, you want to sink pillars down to bedrock if you can. There, they sink stuff to permafrost. They build their foundations on permafrost. Here we have heaving. We have frost heaving. Frost can push stuff out of the ground because, head up, Nick, because as the ground freezes and thaws, it expands and contracts, expands and contracts. That doesn't happen if the ground is permanently frozen. It just stays there. So they actually build their foundations on permafrost. Now, one of the issues that they're having in some parts of Alaska, as the planet warms, guess what's happening to permafrost in some locations? It's thawing out. And what's happening in some places is houses are sinking into the ground because they're built on permafrost. Like a lot of these houses don't have basements because you can't dig into the permafrost. So they're just up on pillars that are sunk down to permafrost, and they sort of sit on pillars. Well, if the ground thaws, those pillars start to collapse because they're not built on rock, they're just built on frozen soil. There are no trees in the tundra. It is a treeless, landscape. You can look out over the tundra and see for miles. Not a single tree to get in your way. And there's not enough water to support them. All the water that's in the soil is frozen solid and trees can't make use of it. So there are no trees. There are little tiny grasses and shrubby things. There probably isn't much vegetation that's higher than your knee. It looks desolate to us, but it's a very fragile landscape. Because remember, we said resilience of ecosystems tends to do what as you get towards the poles? How easily and how fast they can recover from a disturbance goes way down when you get to the poles. Yeah, it's very slow. There's not a lot of water. It's very cold. Everything grows very, very slowly here. Okay, so if we get a little bit more moisture, but we stay pretty cold, we get into the Tyga. This is what a lot of Maine looks like. Northern Minnesota. Northern Canada is largely pine forest, if we stay on this continent. The word comes from Russian, so northern Russia is mostly dominated by taiga. There are all kinds of neat folk stories that come out of the deep, dark forests of northern Europe. Northern Asia, Siberia. Before you get up into the tundra, you have taiga. So this is still very cold, but there is more moisture than in a tundra. The ground here is not permanently frozen. So seasonally, the dominant forms of biomass that you see here are evergreens. So pine trees, fir trees, spruce trees. They all are specially adapted to live in very cold conditions. They've got a waxy coating. The air doesn't hold a lot of moisture. How many of you get, or anybody, get dry skin in the winter? I'm so itchy and flaky right now, it's not funny. We all tend to dry out in the winter. Cold air doesn't hold a lot of moisture. And in these areas, there's not a lot of available moisture most of the year. So plants have to really watch how much water they lose. So most of these things have a special waxy coating on their leaves. Pine needles are just a form of a leaf. You know that. It's a specialized leaf. And that allows them to hold on to more water. So you would not find a maple tree in the taiga. It's mostly evergreens. It's shrubs. A lot of them are kind of stunted looking. You know, these things are kind of windswept looking. It's not a thick, dense, rich forest. Some parts of the taiga are, but a lot of it isn't. So there's some taiga. I will admit that I'm completely biased. A little bit more water, we get the temperate deciduous forest. In my book, it's one of the coolest places on the whole planet to live. I love it. I love my home biome. We have hot summers, we have cold winters. If you don't like the weather, just wait. We get moderate amounts of rainfall. We get enough rain to grow lots of stuff, not so much that nothing ever dries out. And oh, that last line, the dominant autotrophs are deciduous trees. What does dominant mean? I'll let you copy and then we'll break down all the vocabulary here. Temperate. What does temperate mean?
Temperature.
It relates to temperature, but it doesn't mean temperature.
Changes.
No. Temperate kind of means in the middle. So temperate is like moderate. Okay? In the middle. So someplace that is described as having a temperate climate is neither really, really hot all year or really, really cold all year. Okay? So when we're talking about climate, temperate also implies that there's some change. But temperate, we could say that someone had a temperate personality. They're kind of down the middle. They're not really aggressive and like crazy and overwhelmed. And they're not so laid back you can walk all over them. You know, they find a healthy middle ground. So temperate kind of means that middle ground. So temperate, in terms of climate, very often means moderate. And in this case, it also means that there's variation. So that's one vocabulary word to break down. Deciduous. Everybody say it with me. Deciduous. Isn't it fun? Okay. What does deciduous mean?
They lose their leaves after their growing season.
Right. It means these are plants that lose their leaves. So these are plants that die back for part of the year, that have an active growing season and then die back. There are things that are not trees, which are deciduous. There are little herbaceous plants that are deciduous, but in this case we're talking about deciduous trees, things that lose their leaves. So the temperate deciduous forest, we have them here in the Midwest, all the way up into New York State, all the way down into Georgia and Alabama, all the way down along the Appalachians. We have them as far west out as Arkansas. Guess we did have a second bell. Oh well. It goes as far west as places like Arkansas, Iowa. Once you go past those areas on this continent, the forests begin to disappear. Wisconsin is covered in deciduous forest. Southern Minnesota is covered in deciduous forest. So they have a variety of temperatures, hot summers, cold winters. They have a moderate amount of rainfall. Everything about these things is moderate, moderate, moderate. It's down the middle. So they get more rain than some places and less rain than some places. And the big thing here is that the dominant autotrophs are deciduous trees. So dominant, what does that mean?
They overpower the ratio of
There are more of them than anything else in this case. In a temperate deciduous forest biome, most of your plant life, the biggest volume of your plant life, are deciduous trees, trees that lose their leaves. And remember, autotrophs are all things that can make their own food. So plants, bacteria, algae. Okay, enough about the temperate deciduous forest. Let's keep going. The temperate grasslands. Again, we've got that word. They're right down the middle in terms of temperature. They're neither hot all the time nor cold all the time. Their average temperatures tend to be in the middle. If you average their temperature for the entire year, they are temperate grasslands. Again, just like here, they have seasonal changes. Summer is hot, winter is cold. They're too dry to support trees. There's not enough moisture here. And I looked up the figure on how many gallons of water a tree can pull up and put out into the atmosphere in a day. I was confusing it with the yearly figure. So it's about 40,000 gallons a year, which works out to a little over 100 gallons a day. It's still a lot of water. 100 gallons is nothing to laugh at. But that's how much water trees are pulling up. In a place like this, there just isn't enough water to support trees. So we find temperate grasslands in the middle of North America, Kansas, Oklahoma, the northern part of Texas. As you get further south in Texas, it becomes more and more scrub desert. Up into the Dakotas, Nebraska, that's all grassland. That's all temperate grassland. It was a great sea of grasses. And that's where we talked about grasses tall enough to lose a man on horseback in. Grasses tall enough to be on your horse and hide in. That's crazy. So the big form of biomass that's being created here are grasses. Now let me ask you this. Comparing a temperate grassland to a deciduous forest. Remember that biomass is locking up carbon dioxide, among other things. It's locking up carbon dioxide into plants, and it stores it for some period of time. Where do you think we would store carbon dioxide, or carbon, period, longer? In a deciduous forest or in a grassland? So how long does it take for grass to decay versus how long does it take for a tree to decay? Anybody here in charge of mowing the lawn? Anybody have to bag it and dump it in a pile someplace? Okay. Yeah, I don't bag it usually unless I need it for the garden.
I
But
used to bag it.
okay, if you've ever bagged grass or leaves, small stuff, if you dump them in a big pile at the edge of the yard, Nick, head up. Can you find them next year? Sometimes, but a lot of times it's pretty well decayed. It's pretty well broken down. In 5 years, certainly, you wouldn't find them. They'd be gone. If you cut down a tree and stick it in the edge of the yard, you going to be able to see where that tree is in 5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a temperate deciduous forest, you're storing carbon for a lot longer than you are in something like a grassland, because the big form of biomass you're creating in a grassland is, well, not to be too obvious about it, grass. It's a grassland. Okay, but the temperate grassland, all the things that we call prairies, those are a temperate grassland. And there's actually an area in western Ohio. How many of you have gone to Cedar Point? Okay, how many of you have heard of Cedar Point? How many of you could find Cedar Point on a map? Maybe, okay. Get on the turnpike and head west. Head west, young people, head west. If you go a little bit further out towards Toledo, there's an area there that, for a variety of weird reasons, actually had native prairies. It's called the Oak Openings area of Ohio. And there are these weird little native prairies that appeared out there naturally. So anyway, one little odd thing. Okay. Savannas. So all the pictures you've ever seen of Africa, and there's a lion right there. So that's an African savanna. It's basically a warm grassland. So you can almost think of this as like a tropical grassland versus a temperate grassland. They're very warm, they're very dry. There's not enough moisture to support trees. You might get isolated trees. So, we have one there, one there, one there. Guess what's probably underneath where those trees are growing or nearby? Springs. Springs. You will see in a lot of grasslands a clumped distribution of trees. So in the prairies of the West, you see trees along rivers. It's a clumped distribution. That's the only place that there's enough water for trees. In a landscape like this, there's probably a spring or some other water feature there, and that's why you have some trees popping up. So it's a clumped distribution. And these are mostly grass. You get some trees, you get some shrubs, not a whole lot of variety. These places don't have a cold winter. It's uniformly warm all year, so their average temperatures tend to be high. This is the darling of the biomes. Everybody wants to study the tropical rainforest. Everybody thinks tropical rainforests are so cool. Yes, ma'am.
I didn't get it.
Okay. The darling of the biome, it's the poster child. Everybody thinks they're so cool, and they are. They are. But tropical rainforests are uniformly hot and uniformly wet. Tons of rain.
That's like the worst mixture.
For me, yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. I hate nothing more than hot and humid. And this sounds like my absolute nightmare. I love where we live.
I don't think girls would be able to survive there because how humid it is. Their hair freeze. Girls are worried about
Okay, thanks for the clarification there.
it.
Okay, so that high level of precipitation and all that warmth, and remember, these are tropical. They also have lots of energy from the sun, lots of solar energy. So these support incredibly abundant autotroph populations, and it's not just plants. Now, it is trees, it's shrubs, it's herbaceous plants. What is an herbaceous plant? Something that doesn't have a woody stem. So grass is an herbaceous plant. Dandelions are herbaceous plants. Anything that is soft-bodied plant matter is an herbaceous plant. But it's not just plants. These places support crazy populations of all kinds of interesting bacteria, autotrophic bacteria. They support crazy populations of algae. Like algae grows on everything. like you if you stand still. Seriously. Algae's growing on the trees, algae's growing on the ground, algae's growing on leaves, algae's growing on rocks and buildings, and I mean, these places are just a riot of growth, of green growth. They're insanely productive. The rainforest that I've visited is a temperate rainforest out in the Pacific Northwest, and I have witnessed this. I have witnessed people using a snow shovel on their roof to get rid of the moss and algae. Because anything that stands still has a green film over it within a few weeks. It's warm and wet and, and it's, I mean, in the Pacific Northwest it's not warm like this, it's just a temperate rainforest. But here, like if you stood still long enough, moss and algae would grow on you. It's crazy. It's just a wild riot of green life. So these are incredibly productive. Now, let's talk about our last biome. Everybody ready? Okay. So deserts can be anywhere from really, really hot to just warm, and you can have cool deserts. You can have seasonal variation in temperature in a desert. Just because you're in a desert doesn't mean that the temperature is the same all year. The big thing is that these places are very, 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 very dry. So in southern Arizona, the Sonoran Desert. The Sonoran Desert is actually a pretty wet desert by desert standards, and they got about 11 inches of rain a year. That much rain for the whole year. Most of it fell in the 3-month period, and it was there that I became acquainted with a phenomenon called viraga. Viraga is where it's raining, but none of it hits the ground. You can stand underneath a rain cloud and you can see the rain coming down and you can turn your face up to it expectantly because you're so miserable and you just want it to rain. And it all evaporates before it hits the ground because the air is so dry. It's horrible. So in these places, there's not even enough moisture to support trees in most deserts. And deserts still have a range of precipitation. I mean, there are deserts that are much drier than the Sonoran, which I'm describing. And there are deserts which are, well, not much wetter, because the Sonoran's about at the outer edge. That's about as wet as a desert gets. The Mojave Desert, which is outside of Los Angeles in Southern California, that's drier. Most desert plants have got that waxy coating again. Like we said, pine trees have a waxy coating to prevent loss of moisture. In the case of pine trees, it's all about how cold the air is, that it can't hold moisture. In a desert, it's just that there isn't any moisture to hold. So no matter how warm or cold it is. Up next, you are going to take a map and you are going to look at where these biomes occur on the whole globe. If you would be so kind as to open your book to chapter 22, 424? Page 424. There is a map of where different biomes occur on the world. You are going to color code your own map, and then tomorrow we're going to talk about why they occur where they do. So I will pass out those maps.